designer with over 30 years of experience. Her mission is to improve the health and longevity through universal design, which is designed for people of all ages and all abilities. Some of her prominent projects include the Betty Ford Center, Automotive Interior Design for Toyota, the UCLA Medical Center, the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, Laguna Honda, a 1,200-bed hospital for rehabilitation and long-term care, a universal design exhibit for the Smithsonian with Julia Child, the Kohler Design Showroom, in which over 1 million consumers have learned about universal design and heard it. She teaches 2 courses in the architecture department of Harvard University Graduate School of Design and has written 3 books. They are Beautiful Barrier Free, Beautiful Universal Design, and her newest book, Design Details for Health, Applying Universal Design to Healthcare Facilities. Most recently, her home was featured on the cover of the New York Times and International Herald Tribune as an example of design for silence aging. So at this time, I will leave it to Cynthia, who is a wonderful mentor and, better than that, a great friend of mine who has great taste. So here she is.
I have a brother who has schizophrenia. And when he was a young man, basically about the same age as many of you students here, it was as if someone walked up in back of him, injected him with a drug, and he became a different person within about a 2-week period of time. We had absolutely no clue that this was going to occur. He was doing great in school. He's tall, athletic, good looking. He's just graduating from high school, going on to college. And suddenly we were faced with someone that we couldn't even recognize. This happened in the 60s, and we basically had 2 choices. We could keep my brother at home, or we could put him in an institution. There was nothing else on the continuum of care. So, of course, we tried to keep him at home, but he's 6'9". He can be really hard to handle, and we were forced to put him in an institution. I saw firsthand the impact of an institutional environment in a person's life. This institution basically disabled my brother. And I know that because it took them years to stabilize him before he could come back into our home again. And then when he came back, he had another setback, and we thought we were going to have to put him in the institution again. Only this time there was a halfway house in our neighborhood with house parents, a supportive residential environment. And they were able to stabilize him within 2 weeks versus the years in that institutional environment. This is the kind of power that we have with every design decision that we make. With every detail that we put into our projects, we either create people with disabilities or we empower people so that they can do what they want to do and they're no longer disabled. People are not disabled by their physical differences. We all have physical differences. People are only disabled when they can't do what they want to do. And through design, we have the power to allow them to do that. Let me give you a little demonstration here. You made a big mistake. You sat at the front of the group. So, what is your name? Kennedy. Okay. May I borrow your glasses for a second? Thank you. So Kennedy has a pair of glasses here, an orthopedic device, if you will, that lets her do what she wants to do. But now I have her orthopedic device, and she's one of those disabled people over there. She's not one of us normal folk anymore. I want you to think of interior design and architecture as a kind of orthopedic device that helps people do what they want to do so that they're no longer disabled. That's the first point that I want to make. The second is that we have the creative skills to visually integrate these ideas, or no one wants this stuff in their home or office. You know, nobody wants to be stigmatized by these products. No one wants to turn their home into a hospital. Many of these products become emblems of age and disability, advertising our physical differences, and worse than that, segregating us. You know, in the 50s, we thought it was okay to put people of color in one bathroom and everybody else in another bathroom. Here we are in the 21st century, and we're still putting people with disabilities up one ramp and everybody else through another door, putting them in the back door while we all go in the front. And we're giving them a break because we're letting them into the building, you know. We don't think twice about segregating against people with disabilities, but we certainly do think twice about every other kind of segregation now, fortunately. So my point is that we need to use our creative skills to visually integrate these ideas. We lived in a ranching town down in southern Colorado, and the church wanted to put a lift on the front of the church to help people get up about a dozen stairs, because the ramp would have just been, totally unusable with that many stairs. So they put the lift on, and it turned out that the people that were really needing help with the stairs were the elderly widows. And if you think these women were going to get on that thing and get vibrated in front of the whole congregation and have all the noise and the efficacy problems and controls, they continued to drag themselves up by the handrails rather than use this contraption. It just speaks to our need to visually integrate things by design. The final point that I want to make is that this is an opportunity to make an enormous contribution. The reason that I'm here is I'm trying to get all of you to weave universal design throughout the entire curriculum. Not a special project for a special population, but weaving it all the way through so that people are introduced to it early. They're taught that this is simply good design. This is the ethical thing to do. Just like sustainable design, we want to put as much universal design as in the project as possible. You will not get demand for either sustainable design or universal design. People will not hire you to be a universal designer. I don't want you to specialize in this area. I want you to do all your projects this way. So I started out in high-end residential interior design, basically making rich people look richer. Now, that isn't what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about improving the quality of people's lives no matter how much money they have. But that isn't what I was doing. I was putting status symbols in people's homes, and I thought somehow I would find eternal satisfaction by doing that, and it didn't quite work out that way. So I built up my business until I had about a dozen employees, which is a good-sized small business. Was highly invested in this business, and I decided that I wanted out. We don't have children. My contribution was going to be my career, and that's where I was going to make a difference. And I just felt like I wasn't making a difference. But with 12 employees, you hang on for years. You don't want to let the employees down. Until finally, I woke up one day and I simply could not do this anymore. I went into the office, fired all 12 employees, something I'm not proud of to this day, walked away from a thriving business, and just said, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I had trained all the way up to that point to do interior design, and I had no clue what I was going to do. So one of the employees that I fired invited me into a Bible study. Now, I'm not trying to impose my value system on you here, but this issue of contribution and purpose is a spiritual issue. You don't get it resolved by jumping from job to job or trying to switch majors and hoping that you'll land in something. For me, it was all about a calling. It was about having a mission and a very strong purpose in what I was doing. So I came out of that study with this real focused mission that I was going to improve the lives of older disabled people through interior design. Now, I know, isn't this wonderful? Sweet young thing, she's on a mission. But the truth, the real miracle here is that I stayed on that same track for 35 years. I didn't deviate from it at all. Now, that's really hard, especially for artistic people who like to explore all sorts of new things all the time, But the reason that I stayed on that same track is I love what I do. I've loved it the entire time. And that's what I wish for all of you, especially the students. I want you to find something that you absolutely love doing. And even more importantly, if it's interior design, I want you to make sure that you are integrating these ideas into every project. I want you to create a design legacy, a body of work that will empower people for decades. We're not building 5-10-year buildings here. We're building buildings that last for decades. And these buildings disable for decades, or they empower for decades, depending on the tiniest decisions that you make, whether you're putting doorknobs in or levers, whether you're putting thresholds in that are tripping hazards, or putting in the door bottom, which I'll teach you about here in a minute. But there are all sorts of little tiny choices that you can make that empower people. When you're my age, I'm turning 70, I just turned 70. I've been saying I'm turning 70 for a long time here. Just turned 70 this year. I want you to look back at your body of work and realize that you have this wonderful legacy of work that has contributed for decades. Or you could look back and look at all the people that you've disabled with the buildings that you designed. It's your choice, because that's exactly what we do with the little details that we put into these projects. We want it to be healthy and proactive. In other words, I want to motivate you to lead a lifestyle that leads to health and longevity, that reduces your need for health care in the future, that prevents accidents, that encourages you to exercise, that encourages you to do healthy eating. That's a lot to ask of a house, but I want this house to motivate me to do all these things. I'll show you how we do that here in a minute. I wanted it to be visitable by guests with disabilities. I couldn't make it totally accessible because it was an existing home and we had some lower levels, but I tried to put things in those lower levels that we don't need on a day-to-day basis, like the formal entry and the formal dining room, things we can get along without. But the majority of the house is totally accessible, and even the inaccessible areas, I wanted to make them visitable, and I'll tell you how I did that in a minute. I want to make it adaptable to the needs of both tall and short users. My husband says his favorite feature in the whole house is the 42-inch high counter. We have these high counters which drive shorter people crazy when they come to our house. I'm 6 feet, he's 6'3", and we love these high counters, but they're all adjustable. So I'll tell you how I did that here shortly. Regenerative, meaning not just restoring you when you have a surgery or when you have a problem, but how can your house regenerate you on a daily basis? So you come back from work all beat up and you need to be regenerated before you go back to work the next day. How can the house do that? Now, I ended up having a hip replacement a few years ago, and while I was in the hospital, my husband slipped on the racquetball court and tore his Achilles tendon. So he's on this roller thing, this scooter thing, with one knee, and I come out on a walker, and the doctor says, who's going to take care of you guys? You don't have any kids at home. You're going to have to go to a rehab facility, i.e. a nursing home. They tried to put me in the home a few years ago. And I said, oh no, you haven't seen my home. And I used everything in the house. I did all my rehab in our exercise room. There were no tripping hazards, no re-injury after the surgery. And 3 months after the surgery, we did a multi-sport trip in Alaska where we were sea kayaking, biking, hiking, 3 months after the hip replacement, thanks to my house regenerating me. So you never know what you're going to face. It could be older parents coming to visit you, living with you. It could be children and their needs because they have the same reach requirements that people in wheelchairs do many times. So, it really can help everyone. And then finally, I wanted to make it green and universal. So green design isn't my priority in this project, but whenever I could do both, I tried to do that.